Chlöe Swarbrick, man, this was an amazing conversation. I think one of my most favourite. I did ask her a question that was burning on my mind. What's wrong with David Seymour?
I've been asked this question a surprising amount, my friend.
What I like about Chlöe is that she's authentic. She's real. You know, we talked about her mental health struggles, which I didn't know about.
15 plus years on from it, I'm kind of only still starting to unpack that.
We dove into that, how she got out of it, and tools that other people going through similar things can get out of it too, and her vision for the world. What I also like about her is that she's for the people. She's all about helping others that are struggling, and that's what it's about, right? We need more Chlöes, and I said, and I'm going to call it right now, she will be Prime Minister one day. So when she is, you come back and say, you heard it here first. You're going to like this one. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Unfiltered. Enjoy. Chlöe,
Dave,
thank you so much for joining me.
thanks for having me, bro.
Man, it's I came in here complaining as I usually do at how busy things are. I was complaining to the boys. It's like my venting session, but then I thought, I really can't complain to you because you're probably busier than I am.
That's how we get grounded, though, eh?
Yeah.
We share our frustrations and then we come back to why we do this damn thing.
Yeah, so how's it all going?
Oh, it's full on. I mean, I think as you would understand, there's a lot of need and a lot of desperation out there right now. Definitely hearing that from people all across the country. We've been on the road, just actually not only trying to critique what's going on, but provide people with a sense of hope by putting forward some really tangible solutions with our green budget. So, yeah, I mean, I think actually last time I came to your gym, I was talking to those who had just finished one of their classes, Superman's all in sweat, and I'm in my gears, and I was talking about the fact that I think so many of us are so primed to feel so fatigued and so exhausted and so overwhelmed by the state of the world. But when we're in that state of thinking, that state of being, we're kind of backed into a corner and you feel really helpless and you kind of come out swinging and sometimes are just, ready to defend the status quo, not really able to see the future and to work together with other people to try and achieve that. So I think that's the big gap that we have to bridge at the moment, is help people see that there is a better way of doing things on the horizon. But if we just keep fighting each other, we're not going to get there.
How do we do that?
How do we do that? I think that we have to understand that solidarity doesn't require us to be the same. It requires us to see each other's shared humanity and shared interests and to work together on those things, I was actually talking with a real good mate of mine the other day who was actually critiquing me for the fact that I'm always talking about communities, and he was like, no, we need to talk about society. Society is all of these different communities who are deeply interconnected, who don't have to be like each other, who don't actually have to like each other. But the basic premise is that we understand the need to fight for each other's basic needs, whether those are people who you know and love or the people who you've never met.
Yeah, that's true. I even think about it with, sort of my network of friends. I've got friends for all over the spectrum, like Rob Campbell.
Good man.
Leo Malloy.
Yeah. He has words to say about me, I reckon.
But and everyone in between.
Yeah.
And it's, if we can get like that on a whole, because, we don't agree politically over here.
Yeah.
Rob, of course, but they support and agree with the work we do.
Yeah. My old man used to always say different people see different things differently. I later went to uni and studied an undergrad in philosophy and realised my dad wasn't quite Socrates, but didn't come up with the idea of subjectivity. But I've always held true to that, like if you're not able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes or understand their perspective, how are you supposed to have a constructive conversation with them? And I think especially right now, as we see so many working class and low income people all across the world being captivated by strongmen political leaders who ultimately are producing a policy platform that is going to shred the social safety net, roll back their rights and entitlements, but those regular people are voting for those guys. Where does that come from?
Yeah.
That comes from a sense of a lack of trust that the system has delivered for them. It hasn't delivered on the outcomes that they deserve. And when people watch their material interests going backwards and the system not serving them, of course they'll throw a Hail Mary. That makes sense, And And this is what I mean when I say that tepid centrism has been a breeding ground for right-wing radicalism. So again, if we can just kind of come back to earth and have kōrero with people in a way that makes sense, it's just kind of like, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you see your whānau's future, you know? And I think about how back when I first became co-leader of the party, the major thing that I wanted to do, first cab off the rank, was to go and meet with the coal miners. And I was just like, you know, I reckon we got a lot in common with the people who are literally at the coal face.
Yeah.
And we went down to the west coast of the South Island just before we arrived. There was an article in, I think, the Greymouth Star the week before, which was something about Swarbricks coming to town. And in the first paragraph, it had taken some excerpts from my Instagram about how coal was the dirtiest fossil fuel. Oh. And my media team was real scared about how I'd been met with pitchforks. Or I actually love having yarns with people who think that they'll hate you because they're some of the most honest and upfront conversations you ever have, you know. And then after you have that initial, you know, potentially quite frosty interaction and you meet people where they're at and you're willing to absorb that, which I think is also part of my role as a politician, you know. A lot of people know me as a concept and not necessarily as a person. So you get through that understandable defensiveness and that anger because people feel under attack if the conversation is at this pointy end of things. And then, you know, after a little while, that frost dissipates and you get into a space of, oh, wow, what these coal miners actually really want is a decent income to be able to stay in their community, to feel a sense of pride in what they do and provide for their whānau. Well, those are things that we can agree on. How do we get there and how do we move forward?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Even, you know, the conversations getting you here. You know, do I need to prepare? No prep. Let's just talk.
We're going to have a yarn.
Let's have a yarn.
Yeah.
Talking about you personally, that's what, like, when I've had Willie Jackson on, we're having a few more from Labour and Te Pāti Māori and the Greens. Obviously,
we're around. There's a few of us.
Yeah. But it's more about trying to find out about the person behind the politician, you know, and that's what this is about, this platform. You know, so I really want to find out about you. You know, where did you grow up?
All over Tamaki Makaurau, yeah. Lived in, I tried to count them up the other day with my little sister, but a few dozen rental properties, primarily. We had a tiny stint in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea with my old man, but that was only for about a year and a half. My grandma came over and looked after us, but yeah, primarily bouncing around Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, which is part of the reason that I first got involved in politics, because, you know, a decade or so ago, we were facing a really similar situation with the brain drain, high cost of living, former national government, and I was watching all my mates go overseas, and I was like, stay here and fight, you cowards. No, I'm joking, but you know what I mean? Just nothing changes if nothing changes. If people aren't, you know, willing to back where they're from and invest everything that they've got into making it better. That's why I love Auckland, and I will stand up for Auckland till the end of time. I know we've got problems, but they are our problems, and we're going to fight and stay and fix them. Yeah,
100%. And with your friends in those early days all leaving, so were they high school friends? Where'd you go to school?
I went to a few different schools, so went to several primary schools. Then I went to Royal Oak Intermediate, and Royal Oak Intermediate actually was a bit of a pivotal moment in my life. I had a teacher called Mrs. Nabi who had a huge imprint on me, really helped me to understand, you know, as a little Pālangi Pākehā girl in her class, that the world, had been made for people like me, and that there were, you know, a lot of people who were underserved by the way that the world had been made. And just in the way that she taught and did so with such graciousness and such creativity as well. I was allowed to, I remember there was an exercise that she dished all of us out for homework to write a little story or something, and me being the earnest nerd that I was, I took it real seriously, and I ended up producing like a 30-page thing, and I figured out how to make a book online. You know, it probably shows the precocious little weirdo that I was now.
And that was in primary school?
No, that was an intermediate, yeah. I was an intermediate with all my academic badges, all my service badges, but I never got a sports badge. Then ended up getting an outer zone to Epsom Girls Grammar.
Oh, awesome.
And then, I've been pretty open about the fact that I had a pretty rough time as a teenager. Mental health stuff, Yeah, I mean, I think, 15 plus years on from it, I'm kind of only still starting to unpack that. My grandma talks about how when you're a teenager, you're an alien. Your brain doesn't quite make sense to anyone else around you. And there's probably some veracity to that. But yeah, I felt that I didn't feel like I belonged. And I was quite sad about that, so I think the word they use for that is depression. And it's actually been pretty significant. I am 31 now. When I turned 27, which was kind of 10 years on from being in a really, really dark place and maybe not having survived that, I had this really crazy realization that we've actually got quite a lot of time in this life. I'd always lived very immediately about what was right in front of me. And at kind of 27, I was like, holy moly, you're telling me that we have potentially decades and decades and so many different versions of ourselves and so many more experiences to have. And that's a really beautiful realization.
Yeah. We just finished, Manu, Vatuve and I, we just finished a school tour.
Small flex, yeah.
Yeah. He works for us now. But it actually started, we started working in prisons with youth. And then, I mean, obviously really important we're there, but I had this realization. I said, geez, we're starting way too late here.
Yep.
Let's get into schools. So it happened. We went and started working in schools thanks to Annette Presley and Trust Motors. But just on what you were talking about, we're seeing some of these kids. So not the we did the speech, and then teachers would bring up kids afterwards, and you think, man, like they're going through some stuff.
Oh yeah.
Some of these kids have gone through, have lived 5 lives.
100%.
And you think, man, and then so we sort of pivoted a bit in our talks and talking a lot about online bullying, and being careful what you share, and you just don't know that comment.
Yep.
Might be the thing that sends these, kids over the edge.
100%. And then also, I mean, that prompts a few different thoughts. One is definitely, just the wild west of being online and the fact that young people these days, I mean, I'm tail end of the millennials, so, I had Facebook when I was at high school. Instagram was only just starting to be a thing when I was leaving high school. I had Bebo back in the day. I was on Tumblr for a hot minute.
I wish we could go back and get all the photos of Bebo.
Bro, turn off the internet. Nah, I'm joking. But in all seriousness, obviously the internet has allowed us to connect with other people, and I think that's been really important for kind of structurally marginalised groups of people. Like if you think about a rainbow kid in a small town who might not necessarily be geographically proximate to people who are like them, it allows you to feel like you're not alone and to connect with others and, see that the world is bigger or whatever. But also, as you say, it can become an echo chamber. And I think it is actually important for all of us to reflect on who is in control of the platforms that we are using and what that is doing to our society, because those algorithms are geared towards outrage. They are not geared towards building a stronger democracy, are they? Yeah.
I tell the boys here at Fanaticals, they run the TikTok here, and our TikTok on my personal one, I don't even go towards it. It's a sewer. I can't stand it.
I had to get off Twitter for that reason, and my mental health was so much better as a result. Yeah,
because it is like it's like you might. It's funny because you get. I actually went off TikTok, and it's a funny story. I got my first cool car, and I mean it was a Ute. Like, I rebuilt. I got my first. It was a BT50, but I was proud of it.
She says nodding, pretending she knows what that is. I love a bus,
it was just a Mitsubishi.
yeah.
But and I'd done a TikTok of me coming into our gym and like playing cool music and like put all these cones around it so no one can park next to me. And then I got all this hate saying, bro, it's a fucking Mitsubishi. And I was like, I'm getting off TikTok. I'm never doing it again. But it's just, you might get. It's always the haters and all those negative comments that seem to really get to you.
There's an ease of judgment. I mean, on that point around the hate kind of getting to you, Oh man, that was actually one of the more challenging things about coming into this very strange public arena. You know, people are always asking me, what's it like to be a young person in politics? Well, firstly, obviously, I'm not super young anymore. But secondly, I don't know what it's like to be an older person in politics, so people should ask Winston Peters that. But thirdly, I think growing up in that environment of such toxicity online and being so normalized and so exposed to it, but also, you know, being raised and socialized as a woman where, you know, every facet of the way that you look is under the microscope and open to critique or whatever else. When I first started getting that avalanche of hate, which was pretty early on, back in 2016, when I first put myself forward for the local government elections, again, as this earnest nerd who was just like, we could do things better. How about we talk about the issues? All of a sudden, you know, everybody's throwing everything that they possibly can at me, and I'm just feeling like I'm a normal person trying to have a constructive conversation. But those comments, particularly those negative comments, for me, at least initially, and still definitely something I'm working on, resonated a lot harder with my sense of self-perception because, you know, I was in such a place of self-loathing. And then people go, oh, but what about all the nice stuff? And it's like, well, I see the nice stuff and I'm like, well, that's not about me. These people don't know me. Yeah. But then you see the mean stuff and you're like, oh, this person sees me and they hate me and I hate myself. And, you know, it takes a lot of work to get out of that frame of mind.
True. I don't think depression ever really goes.
No.
You sort of get better at dealing with it. I'm in and out.
It's definitely not a linear process.
Yeah. I'm just, you know, and it's, again, started for me pretty young. And, you know, 21, I put a knife into my chest. And thank goodness, just like for yourself, thank goodness these things didn't happen, didn't work. Because we're here doing this work. But how did you get through those tough times?
Honestly, I think in a lot of ways there was this really perverse simplicity, particularly when I was around 17, where I was like, I need to leave home, I need to leave school, I need to completely change my life. And kind of the worst that can happen is that I'm not here anymore, right? So potentially there's all upside. If this doesn't work out, then I could not be here anymore. Want to add all of the trigger warnings and all of the other things to that. But yeah, there was just, I think, this very bizarre sense of simplicity that you just keep swimming, keep swimming. And if you don't, then who knows what's going to happen. And out of that process of continuing to just keep swimming and to just try and move on to the next thing, I was really lucky to find people who were committed to making the world a better place in ways big and small. And I think that's another really important thing to note for everybody who feels really upset and angry about the state of the world. Look for the helpers and join them, because you'll find a heck of a lot of people who are doing their bit, you know. And if we understand that the world that we've got at the moment and this inequality and this unfairness and this poverty and this homelessness and all of this awfulness is a product of the system which the majority of us, whether we want to or not, are kind of participating in and practicing every single day, or if in our daily practice we can do something different, then not only is that helping us to create the world that we want to live in, but that also has a profound effect on you as a person. So I think, there's Johann Hari who wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, which has actually helped to change quite a lot of people's minds about the war on drugs and how we actually take a health-based approach so that, you know, God forbid we actually address these issues fundamentally, as opposed to locking people up and throwing away the key and going, why are the outcomes getting worse? He talks about how the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. It's finding connection in other people and therefore your sense of purpose, your sense of self, and that grounding. So I think that's it.
That's so true. We had George on last week, a good friend of mine who went through addiction. My sister's in and out of addiction. She's doing well at the moment. You know, we all want to belong to something, eh? You know, and that's, to me, there's no... It's
pretty primal,
Yeah. You know, and then we wonder why, you know, if there's nothing positive for people to belong to, we wonder why they're joining gangs.
Yep.
That's what they offer.
100%.
a sense of
100%.
belonging.
Yeah. We ostracize people and then they go and create their own groups.
Yeah.
And we're like, wow, how did that happen? Yeah. But that brings me to actually connecting to your kōrero earlier about, going and talking to these rangatahi at school. I was reflecting on the heinous reality and truth of the history of this country with the Abuse and State Care Royal Commission report last year. And it struck me, this quote, which I'll absolutely butcher and paraphrasing now, but it's something along the lines of, if a child doesn't feel warmth from their community, then they'll burn it down to feel that warmth.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting on this conversation that I had with a woman on the plane, probably about 2 years or so ago now, when we were at the height of kind of the moral panic about our kids doing ram raids. And that always also struck me because, of course, that is not a crime of hope. That is a crime of absolute destruction.
Yeah.
It just utterly boggles the mind that we look at that behaviour and we go, we have to punish those children, as opposed to understand what on earth drives young people to do such things. But in talking to this woman and kind of unpacking, because she was really worried about this, unpacking her kind of concerns and helping her to understand some of those socioeconomic factors and that sense of hopelessness that perhaps comes from material deprivation and otherwise, it was interesting that she could empathise with, a 14-year-old boy in that situation. And then the more that we talked about the prison population and just kind of the concern around crime that was obviously abundantly apparent at that point in time, it became clear that while she could empathise with the 14-year-old boy, she couldn't quite empathise with the 40-year-old man who that 14-year-old boy had become for sake of the thought experiment. Yeah. This 14-year-old boy who, for sake of argument, had obviously come from, a pretty hardcore upbringing and then had got involved in, the youth justice, so-called justice system, and then had cycled in and out of state care, and then obviously off the back of that felt ostracised, alienated, but found his only community in gangs or otherwise, and then gets onto this pathway of criminality. And that's always stayed with me, the idea that we can empathise with the 14-year-old boy, but when that 14-year-old boy becomes a 40-year-old man, we're willing to dispose of him as a person. And that to me should be a prompt for all of us to go, there's always an opportunity for a human being to be the best version of themselves in the most constructive possible environment.
Yeah, it's so true. My father, who works, you should meet him actually. He works with him and my sister founded Grace Foundation, one of the biggest powerhouses in the country. Yeah, so my sister
it's
Vicky,
a small country, isn't it?
Yeah, they do amazing work. But he puts it, people talk about how many chances are you going to give these people? So, well, how about their first one?
Yeah.
And my dad always puts it like, I actually steal a lot of his quotes when I'm speaking, but, he puts it, that criminal is once a victim.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of corporate speaking. That's how I earn money. And I put a photo up of me and my late sister Vicky, who founded Grace, on a doorstep when we were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. Innocent. I'm trying to say, just look at this picture. Innocent kids. No choice on the family they've been born into, the mob family that we've been born into, the environment we're being raised. No choice. We're innocent kids. The kids don't have a choice. So, we've got to understand that, and then, 20 or 18 years later, I'm on that same doorstep after I stabbed myself. That same doorstep thinking, man, how did my life end up here? People have to understand that it's, a lot of us are born so far behind the start line we can't see it.
Yep.
And if we truly want a better Aotearoa for our kids and grandkids, we have to help these people.
Totally.
We have to.
And that's not about, because I think sometimes when we have this conversation, particularly when it gets to that acute or pointy end of talking about how potentially all of this stuff builds up towards, whether it be the committing of a crime or whatever, people go, oh, you just don't want people to be held accountable. No, that's not what we're saying at all, to be clear. Accountability is actually critical to people understanding who they are in relation to other people. So that accountability and that repair and that restoration for whatever the rupture has happened is critical. But we have to understand that context, and we have to understand that unless we are willing to see that context and to find ways to actually help that person get onto a better path, then we're potentially just pushing them more so into worse and worse outcomes. And that's where, just the way that we do so-called justice, not only in this country, but across much of the world, just blows my mind. This system produces not only more criminality, but also more victims. And for all of the strongman political rhetoric about going tough on crime or whatever else, if you're producing more crime through that approach, I think that is just utterly irresponsible. How can you call yourself a leader if you can look at the evidence and the experience and see that the approach that you are taking is causing more harm and more devastation to our communities, and you're unwilling to grapple with the complexity? Like, get a grip.
Do you think this current government actually care?
I've spent a long time trying to actually understand the motivations and what on earth is going on behind the scenes of this government, because, look, as I've kind of already said, I'm an earnest nerd. I genuinely want to understand where people are coming from. And I don't know. I don't know beyond because it doesn't make any sense. They know, because their own advice consistently tells them that the approaches that they are taking are going to make life harder for regular working people, for low-income people. They are going to increase climate changing emissions, increase homelessness. They then go ahead with those decisions, and then the consequences of those decisions are exactly what they were forewarned were going to be. And I don't know how to take that other than this government is intentionally increasing homelessness, increasing climate changing emissions, increasing poverty, and increasing inequality. So where I really get to in all of that, bro, is I think what is driving them, because it is the only evidence that we clearly have, because the rhetoric just doesn't add up, is that they are supporting the interests of people who are whispering into their ears behind the scenes. And I mean, that's pretty transparent when you look at donations and otherwise.
Yeah. I remember we got a donation from someone. I didn't know at the time, but it's an ACT supporter, and quite a big donor. And then I started having to go and then I was getting all these messages, and I said, "Well, you take it back if you want." Because I'm not going to change.
And that's on integrity.
Yeah, it's funny, with this whole political stuff. All of my right mates on the right all support the work.
Yeah.
But when I'm having to go at the right, they're all upset.
Yeah.
But I said, well, I did the same thing to Labour. So
Totally.
Why were you guys not upset then?
Yeah.
It's always about just holding whoever's into account. And it's funny because I have a funny knack of pissing off all governments.
Yeah.
I don't know, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think on the whole that's probably a good thing. I think that this is the advice that I give to anyone who comes through my office or who's trying to figure out how they can actually get things done, and they're obviously coming to me as their local politician or holding a portfolio in an area that they're advocating for. And I'm just like, say the same things in private as you do in public. Be the same person in private as you are in public, because that way you are not going to be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
You're not going to end up, with your reputation, washing the reputation of this politician who might just use you for a hot minute and then drop you when the times get tough.
Yeah, I've experienced that a lot. Being leveraged, and then as soon as they're done with you, you don't see them.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be a bit smarter this time. This election, I'll be waiting for this next election to come through. But what's wrong with David Seymour?
I've been asked this question a surprising amount, my friend. Again, I think for him and for a number of other people in this government, the best conclusion, the most evidence-based, if you will, conclusion that I have come to is that they conceive of the work that we do in Parliament as a game to win and not as literally holding the keys to solving so many of the issues that we face as a country. So when you see politics, which isn't as complicated as a lot of people make out, politics isn't, I'm not talking about it here as Parliament or political parties or politicians. Politics is just about power, it's about resources, and it's about who gets to make decisions that saturate and shape our daily lives. When you understand that, it's all political, But I think, with a lot of people in this government, they see it as a game to win, and that means that the incentives are and the outcomes are controversial headlines and cut through, but not improving the real material circumstances of our people. And that's why when so many people ask me, after all of the bluster in the chamber happens, do you all just go out and have a beer together? I have to kind of go, friends don't let friends abuse human rights.
Yeah.
It's really hard to have a baseline level of camaraderie with someone who is knowingly making more people homeless, knowingly pushing more children into poverty. I find that a really hard one to grapple with.
Yeah. People say to me, you should go into politics. And I'll probably give them a hiding.
The amount of times I get emails with people who are like, you were rolling your eyes in that interview. I'm like, you have no idea how much I'm restraining myself, my friend.
It would be so hard. What would you, just, last couple of questions, what would you say to a young, I'm going to tell you, like you were, maybe 16, 17-year-old going through tough times, no sense of belonging, not sure, even if they belong here. What would you say to that person?
I remember reading a book when I was a teenager, and again, I'll butcher this when I paraphrase it or repeat it, but it was, I think it might have been Perks of Being a Wallflower, so we're getting real cheesy here. But it was something about how it'll be okay in the end, and if it's not okay, it's not the end. Things will pan out. And I also remember my grandma, I don't even remember where we were, but it was, again, years and years and years ago, and I would have been in my early teens, and she was drawing on the back of a napkin these lines going up and down and talking about life being a roller coaster, and how when you kind of zoom out and look at the context of that, sure, there were some real dark dips in there, but there obviously was times when you were on the up. And when you understand that in the context of your life, again, you get to take a deep breath and you get to understand that this too shall pass, So my message for those rangatahi is you are loved. And for that version of myself, I don't know, you can spend a really long time looking for validation externally that you are worthy, but actually at a certain point, you got to realize that can only really come from inside you. And that little voice is a little version of yourself, and that little version of yourself is probably quite hurt. So pay some attention to that and give that some love.
What would you say to your 17-year-old self now, knowing what you know now where you are?
Man, what would I say to my 17? Honestly, bro, it would be so buzzy to tell my 17-year-old stuff where I landed, like, what is going on? I would say to my 17-year-old self, just keep going. I mean, I was really, really sad, and I have spent a long time, and I'm still on that journey, trying to feel, that sense of self-worth and all of those other things. But I'd just say to her that it's worth it, and that you will find your people, and that you will find your purpose, and that you will find your place. And obviously everybody deserves that.
Yeah, that's powerful. Powerful, sis. Last question I ask everyone that comes on. What's your why?
What's my why? The people. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Yeah, truly. I just can't fathom why we would put up with a system, a game, if you will, that punishes more and more people every single year, where fewer and fewer people win. We don't live in a game of Monopoly. We can and should change the rules when they don't work for the majority of us.
Yeah.
And I'm inspired not only by thinking about history and how the power of regular people working together has radically transformed the pathways that we've been on as humanity, but also in the day-to-day, you know, in ways big and small, where regular people look out for each other when the lights and the cameras aren't on them. That to me is human nature. That to me is magic.
Yeah.
It's our power. And I think about that when I'm, you know, have the privilege of speaking at rallies and stuff, which is also still such a crazy experience when people are like, go and say something interesting. And I'm like, oh, me? But I've been reflecting a lot recently on how in those crowds of hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who've mobilised of late for Toi Tu Te Tiriti, for a free Palestine, for making sure our kids are fed, for pay equity, for all of those kaupapa. There are so many things that so many politicians could point to divide the people in those crowds, but the things that unify the people in those spaces are so much bigger. So I think it is critical that we all realise not just what it is that we're opposed to, not just what it is that we're against, but that we have so much more power in holding strong to the things that we are for love and for justice and for peace. That stuff is big.
Yeah. Last message to the voters to mobilise for next year.
Yeah. I'm not even just going to give you a party political message. I'm going to say I have always had a really strong belief that New Zealanders care about each other and the planet that we live on. Yet most of politics, and even as we've just been talking about, the social media landscape and otherwise, is geared towards having people fight each other and go towards the jugular. But what if we just, you know, taiho, take a second and take a deep breath and think about the world that we want to live in. Think about the healthcare, the education, the housing, the basic services that you and your whānau should be entitled to in a functional country, and fight for those things not just for yourself, but for your fellow human being. And realize that no politician, no political party is entitled to anything at all. New Zealanders get to decide the future of this country. So my final point would be, you know, after 40 years of trickle-down economics where we were promised that just growing this pie would result in greater outcomes for everyone, and that's clearly been shown to be an abject lie, well, maybe it's time for us to realise that we're not 5 million random people all running around this country doing our own thing and fighting each other. We are New Zealanders, and we get to choose to build this country into something that works for all of us and to feel a sense of pride in that, as opposed to the unfortunate current state of affairs where people are leaving at a rate of knots. 500,000 New Zealanders are going to food banks every single week.
Yeah.
That's not what we want. That's not us. So let's practice in our day-to-day building that world that we want to live in.
Amen.
I'm in there.
Thank you so much, Chlöe, for coming in.
Thanks
Future
for
Prime
having me,
Minister,
bro.
I reckon. Calling it now.
Raged so hard against the machine, I somehow ended up inside it.
Yeah. We need you in there.
Thank
we
you,
need
bro.
people.
I appreciate
we
it.
all have our roles, and we need you in there.
We all do have our roles, eh? Yeah. And I think that's actually the other thing, just for all those young people out there, there are so many different ways to contribute. There are so many different ways to be who you are, and there is a place for everyone. And ain't that cool?
That is cool. Thank you, sis.
Thank you,
That's
bro.
epic. If you made it this far, thank you so much for the support. It really does mean so much to us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and comment on our videos, and share this out. These stories are so inspiring, and they need to be heard by everyone. Thank you so much, team.